Hello and welcome to our second panel of this evening on the Spotlight Indie Big Indie Weekend. This is Women in War and Politics. I am H.L. Tinsley, wielder of ultimate power at Spotlight Indie, and I am joined by some lovely indie author guests. So before we get started, let's do a quick circle round and get everyone to introduce themselves, starting, if I may, with Mr. Tim Hardy.
Yeah, thanks, Holly. Yeah, I'm Tim Hardy. I'm a UK-based fantasy author, so probably best known for writing. I have remembered books this time. I've become more prepared. All of Bones and the Brotherhood of the Eagle fantasy series, which was a Spiffbo finalist a few years ago now. And I'm also currently reinvigorating my standalone series of books, which began with A Quiet Vengeance. So I'm beginning the book process this year of starting to resume that sequence as well. So that's me.
Lovely. And Phil, if you'd like to go next.
Hi, I'm Phil. I'm an indie author of fantasy, urban fantasy, kind of thrillers, and they've got sort of horror twinges. And my most recent series is the epic military fantasies, the Blood Scouts one, which is all about female soldiers. I thought I'd fit in here, but I didn't bring my books as props this time. I've got a few other people's books next to me, but not mine.
Oh. Do you want to show off anyone else's books, Phil? Yeah.
Well, actually, I brought a couple. They might come up later. These were ones I thought might be interesting for the discussion. They're non-fiction books about women in war.
I love it.
Circle back to that.
Brilliant. And next up, Nick, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello, I'm NC Scrimger and I am a science fiction and fantasy author. So I have one sort of space opera series out called the Way Stations Trilogy, and I also have a folklore fantasy series which is kind of like Scottish inspired, and that is the Sea of Souls saga.
Brilliant. And last but certainly not least, joining us for the third time today, it is friend of the panel, Emily Hinkfen. Emily, how are you in your husky voice?
My husky voice is still husky. I think in between whiles you got a pre-recorded version of me that was not husky. So we've had husky, not husky, husky. We're back with me today. And yeah, so I'm a writer of audio drama, which is also quite entertaining given the fact that my voice is so crappy at the moment. But yeah, my audio drama, The Dex Legacy, is dark, military, political, sci-fi, about set in a far future. And audio drama is, because it's audio drama, it's free, available anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can, just search it, The Dex Legacy. There's a spin-off series called Wasteland. I've got the scripts and commentary books, but they're all the way over there, which is about 1.5 meters, but I'm not getting up. But if you search, like if you go on the website dexlegacy.com, you'll get direct links to the audio dramas and you can find the books. And that's me.
Awesome. We'll forgive you for not wanting to go and get you're ill. We don't want you to collapse on the way to retrieving them.
It would be embarrassing, wouldn't it? You just hear it and then like everything would go fine.
We could use it in the blooper reel later on.
Yeah.
So, fabulous panel of guests tonight. What are we here to talk about? Well, the name of the panel tonight is Women in War and Politics, but what we're really talking about is writing women in positions of power and authority. And what I would like us to be able to do is pull the collective wisdom of all our panelists to help you write better depictions of women in these positions of power. What we are not here to do tonight is to lambast or make anyone feel guilty about making any mistakes. We are not going to be mentioning breasting boobily at any point. This is all about improving your craft. So, to get us started, I'm going to pose an open question to the panel, so anyone can jump in on this one. If you don't jump in, I will pick on someone, as is my power. But I want to start by talking about, do we find as readers and as writers that when we talk about women in particular in positions of power in fiction, there is a confusion or perhaps a bias towards empowered as opposed to in power? Because those are two very different things, and their depictions need to be crafted very differently. So does anyone want to start us off with kind of their take on the difference, maybe? You're going to make me pick on someone, aren't you?
I can go.
Go on.
I think you hit the whole issue on the head there, because it's, when you think about women in power in books or in general, I'd say it's much, much rarer. I think you mostly find stories that are positioned to consider the transition or to consider putting someone in a place where they're not normally. And it's very rare. I was looking at the questions again earlier and just thinking how many examples can I really think of in what I've read of stories where it is natural and it's just you have a woman in power. It doesn't happen very often at all. It's often about the struggles they face with power, or getting power and being power and that whole journey. So it's I think you've got a very different spectrum there between in power being something that would feel natural and that it's just that's there and they're dealing with this role, as opposed to being empowered and achieving the role, I guess.
I would say that there's a very definite, there are very specific arenas where women are expected to be in power, and often they are in caring roles. So like doctors, nurses, sort of like if you think about the sort of medical healers that you see in things like Avatar: The Last Airbender, when they go to the Southern Water Tribe, and all of the women in that area are very, in power in that specific spot, and that is a given, but they are not anywhere else, and they're not allowed to be powerful in any other position. And then there's also convents and things like that. So it's normally where women are in little silos. You find like if there's a society of women, then of course a woman's going to be in power. But as soon as it's not a silo of women, it's not a normal thing. That's my experience anyway.
I think as well, like even with fantasy and sort of sci-fi worlds in which you can maybe create a secondary world in which, men and women can be equal by default, and you don't really have to explain why this has happened any more than you have to explain, how certain tech works or how dragons have evolved to fly or whatever. That can be the baseline. But even if you do have a world like that, there's kind of no escaping that as a reader, you're kind of bringing the real world sort of baggage as well. So even if you write worlds like that, it's not in a vacuum. Like we're also bringing our own sort of experiences as well. So there's always kind of going to be that interplay, even in worlds that we do write that are more equitable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you also bring in, just your unconscious, literary experience and what you've grown up reading. I think for me, I think it's quite important to be conscious of the issue and conscious of how you portray, all sorts of things in your writing. As a sort of child in the 70s and a grew up in a diet of 80s fantasy, it very much, I think, how women were portrayed in the books that I was reading when I was at that sort of age, early teens, whatever. It just presented a particular worldview that really, I suppose at the time, I never really actually questioned. And I think now as sort of a writer, in 2026, you're much more aware. I'm much more aware of the fact that actually there are those dynamics you really got to think about. And whilst I love the books I read in the 70s and 80s, I'm also quite delighted by the fact that I feel there's much more choice and actually much more representation and much more diverse fiction out there now, which kind of shows how it can be done and how you can approach those issues in a different way. So I feel quite privileged in some ways. I've read the classics, but I'm also kind of in the experience the sharp end of actually, I think a lot of societal change and a lot of people approaching fiction in a very different way, in a very conscious way, to sort of address issues that perhaps previously we just never really consciously addressed it in the writing. We simply reflected a lot of the principles and the biases that sort of we grew up with, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points there. I do want to just say hello to a couple of people in the chat. So hi to Mark, hi to Mustachius, Mousey Mouse. Hi to Ricky's Reading Nook, Judge's Friends, and to Alex. If anyone has any questions, please pop them in the chat and we will post them to our panelists as well. But just to dive a little bit deeper into this whole idea of empowered versus empowered, and talking a little bit about how we craft the nuances of those characters. If we were to take a very archetypal character, let's say the warrior character, because I can't think of another one at the moment, and there's a warrior panel tomorrow, so let's go with that one. If we talk about a woman who is a warrior, do we naturally lean more towards the empowered rather than the empowered? And if we're going to write those characters, what traits or what things can we put in to make sure we're creating a definition between the two?
So this is interesting because I mean I write one of my key female characters is a soldier. She's a child. She's a teenager, and she's been raised. She's got 2 brothers, and all 3 of them have been raised to be in a sort of command position. But their command position also comes with a certain amount of, they are the children, they're adopted children of a president. So basically they're brats. They are utter brats. So the fact that she is in power is really just an assumption based on her upbringing and the amount of work she's had done on her and like her abilities and everything. So yes, she is empowered. She is also in power, but how much of that is just an assumption, like that she has been put in this place? And also they are like, the 3 of them are actually also not in power at all, because they are owned, they are prototypes, they are completely not in power. They don't even own their own bodies technically. And so that one is a really interesting one to sort of play with, because they are technically, physically the strongest, technically most powerful people probably on the planet, but also have 0 power. And yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I started out with a direction and it was going to be and then I just circled back and was like, actually, no, there's no power at all. And yeah.
I think the warrior kind of archetype can be quite interesting, because they can be quite, powerful characters, whether that's physical or, but quite often a warrior character won't necessarily be in power. They'll be kind of doing the bidding of someone else. So there's also that kind of dynamic between being whether it's like physically, strategically strong, powerful character, but also perhaps not having the agency to, make decisions and being told what to do by someone else higher in power, whether it's political or, so yeah, I think that can be quite an interesting balance as well. And also specifically talking about women as warrior characters, because I think quite a lot of times there's a sort of not pushback, but if you write a kind of women warrior character in a certain way, it can be kind of like, oh, well, like she's basically just a male character, so what is actually me? So and I don't think there's anything wrong with either way. I mean, I just think that just because one character is acting and maybe that's that way, it's not necessarily like all your female characters are acting in that way. So yeah, going on to just women as warrior characters, I say one of like my favorite ones would be Gideon from Gideon the Ninth, who is like a sort of quintessential like knight archetype, but is written in a way that completely sort of undermines that and the kind of the humor and the absurdity of it. So it's a really nice way to take that stereotype and just break it and make it something totally different. But again, she is powerful, she is strong, but she is under kind of Harrow's control and she doesn't have her own agency as such. So there can be really different dynamics at play in terms of power, which can be interesting to explore in that way.
Yeah, that definitely. Phil, did you want to jump on that at all before we move on to another question?
Oh no, so many thoughts there now. I was going to take a step back a little bit and say, actually, I think when you're presenting any position of power like that, especially when we're going against the archetype as like a woman warrior, it probably starts a lot with the world building to begin with anyway, that you're trying to think what's the situation where we can create this position that feels either natural or requires empowerment. It starts with, in this situation, is it a place where she belongs? Is it something that's come to her naturally, or is it something that she has to work towards? That's just going to add that, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very valid point. This kind of sort of leads a little bit into my next question, talking about kind of the world building and also kind of going into a little bit more of what Nick was saying. Just talking about, building these characters and defining them in their own right, as opposed to in relation to the people around them. Because a lot of the time when we see women, especially in these kind of positions of power, it is as a crutch or a foil, or it is in opposition to someone else. It's that old trope of women being the supporting cast in their own lives. So how can we try to move away from that? Again, I'll leave it open to anyone who wants to jump in, but I will pick on someone if no one speaks up.
God, this is terrifying. Every time you say that, my mind just goes.
This is the power I wield. Ultimate authority.
I'll chip in on this one if that's okay, because I think in terms of sort of, I suppose, forging your own destiny. I mean, Etta springs to mind for me in the sort of the Brotherhood series because an older woman who, in some respects, deliberately tries to hang around in the shadows, but actually, the more you get to know her, the more terrifying she becomes as an individual, and the more you realise actually she is, she's actually running the show and putting these other, often it's that sort of that point of, the characters feel like they have a good reason for doing what they're doing, but actually the layers of meaning behind why Etta is suggesting a particular course of action isn't apparent to them at the moment at that particular point, but it slowly becomes clearer. So I think having your own agenda, even if it's not necessarily clear on the page at the outset for the reader, some of these things in terms of Etta's character become clear in books 3 and books 4 for me. And you think, oh, that actually really makes me think back to what was going on in book 1, and she wasn't actually nearly as nice as we thought she was back at the beginning. But I think having that sort of agency and that kind of your own motivations is a key part of that. Actually, it needs to be credible and believable that particular character wants to move those levers and put those things into motion. Really.
Yeah, definitely. I think the important word for me there is agenda, because when we're talking about these characters, we're not just talking about lead characters. We're talking about all of your women characters, and that could be supporting characters. It could be the admiral at the Starfleet. They don't have to be a prolific character in the book to still need agency. Emily, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay, so I've got this ongoing blog series that I'm working on and constantly adding to. It's called Writing Female Characters, and it's specifically for the breasting boobly people, and it's designed to be completely non-judgmental, but like, okay, you've got these female characters. The female characters might not be perfect. How do we fix them? Or like, these are the questions you should be asking when actually focusing on female characters. The female warriors is 4 separate articles, because I was writing it got to 10,000 words long, and I thought, you know what, we're going to have to split this up. So that's 4 whole blog posts on that one. I've just done wives. I did female characters in crisis. That's also very topical, because it's a lot of politics and leadership styles and everything that is specific to women. But one of the things that I always circle back to in that is, what is she doing for herself? Because that is instantly the thing. I've got the female villains article that I wrote there. It was like, all villains think that they are the hero in their own story. And that is always something often that is attributed to male villains. But how many female villains out there are doing what they're doing just to bring him down? And then he is the focus. He is actually the topic. She isn't doing it for herself. She's doing it for his story. And it's like, well, nobody exists like that. Everybody is selfish. Everybody is self-motivated. Everyone has a goal, and the goal is not centered on one human being. It's the human being it's centered on is yourself, right? Everybody and so as soon as you say, okay, what does she want specifically? That is where it gets interesting. And I think a lot of people sometimes, especially if they are not familiar with female characters, or if the representations of women that they have seen or been exposed to in media, which is terrible generally. I mean, if we look at very popular Hollywood movies coming out like now, so much of them are awful and terribly written female characters. So it's not necessarily surprising if people keep writing this garbage, because that's all that we've got to go on. Some people can literally go through their entire lives without seeing anything better. And it's sort of like my thinking there is, you got to see the world from a female point of view. Here are questions that here are topics that she would have been thinking about. Here are motivations that she would probably have from a female viewpoint that guys aren't going to have. I've got a whole section in the female villains ones where it's like legitimate causes of female rage. Because just in case you're a guy and you've never really spoken to a woman before, there are lots and lots of reasons why a woman might feel rage about things, and these are they, and they're great motivations. And so, yeah, just looking at the world from a female perspective. And yeah, so if anyone's doing it, look up that blog post. I like those blog posts.
They are it's a really good series. If you haven't read it, I would definitely recommend it. There is a lot of really good, valuable advice in there. Let's talk a little bit then about writing not garbage, because that's really what we want to try and encourage people to do. let's talk about building worlds with power systems where women in authority are not outside the status quo, because as we've sort of touched on already, that's not reflective of the real world we live in. If we're being honest, it's not in many places and for many people. So how can we build that into stories in a way that is believable? Because we all know from experience, if you try to build a world like that, people go, that's not realistic. So how do we shift those perspectives? I'm going to pick on Tim this time, because I know Tim does a lot of world building, so it's his thing, so he can talk about it.
This isn't I just need to cough just a second and I will come back to you.
Okay.
That was the cough of podcast panic. I suppose it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I suppose the reader brings an awful lot to the party, don't they? So what the reader believes or finds credible, one person's that's really awesome, is another one's that's ridiculous. And I think, and I suppose in fantasy in particular, that you've got, I suppose you've got all the toys in the toy box, haven't you? And it's about, I suppose, deploying them credibly. I feel a little bit guilty being on this panel because Brotherhood is based around a male warrior cult where women are actually subservient, and actually it's actually a 4-book series about the cultural change of the clans. But in the same fantasy world, A Quiet Vengeance is set in a different continent with a different culture where the expectations are totally different in that world. I've never had feedback to say one or the other wasn't particularly realistic. So I suppose it's probably just thinking about the details of, and I am probably a bit annoying at this. I do sit down and I really do think about that world building from the off. What are the sort of societal levers that kind of come into play? What is the role of different members of society? And I suppose just being really consistent with how you build that up. I think it's almost like with Nimsa, my sort of the banker character, who's sort of like is one of the two viewpoint characters in A Quiet Vengeance. To be honest with you, it's never questioned that she's in that position of power from a female perspective. It's questioned how the hell she got there, because she's from a very low social standing, and that's really part of the mystery of the novel, is how did she move from being in a criminal gang as a small child into being in one of the major, most powerful banking houses in Samarkand in the novel, in the sort of the second timeline that takes place. But actually the sort of, I suppose the gender roles of that society are much more evenly balanced, whereas I deliberately with Brotherhood made them very male dominated, and then almost like that created the friction and some of the grit that then creates the sort of, I suppose, the tension and the changes that come about in that series. So I think it's consistency and just establishing things clearly from the outset is a key part of that, really.
I do want to open this up to everyone else to talk about world building, but just first I'd like to just pop up a comment from ELI, just saying, I feel like there's a distinction in the approach whether the female characters are human or man-eating selkies. I feel like that might be particularly pointed at some people in the panel. Nick, do you want to weigh in the world building?
Yeah, I think the world building has such a big part to play in it. If you're writing a historical fantasy or maybe a near future sci-fi that's set in our world, you probably are going to have to address it in a slightly different way, because you do have that real world context to either explain how things changed or how things might have got there. Whereas if you're writing in a secondary fantasy world or sci-fi set, thousands of years in the future, there's probably a little bit more leeway and scope to say, actually, this is just how things are. We're not going to delve too deeply into it. So I think there's different sort of approaches that you can take. One of the ones I really actually like is just completely flipping it on his head. If anyone else has read The Bone Ships, it's a completely flipped matriarchal society. And I think the world building in that series kind of adds to that immersion, so you never really question it, down to the little things like in our world we normally address ships as female, so there she goes or whatever as a ship, and then in this series they're he instead of she, and all the kind of little idioms that if you'd normally say boys and girls, it flips around to girls and boys, and it's just really little bits of world building, but all these things kind of woven in just sort of helps add to that feel of being immersed in that society. And the more you read these books, you're not even questioning about why the ship's captains are only female and they hold that position of power and the men don't have any power at all. it's just all the little world building things that go into making that believable. So I think it is, as Tim said, about that consistency and coherency of creating a world like that. So if you come to it as a reader and maybe that isn't what you expect or isn't what you're used to, you can still buy into that and feel like this world is believable.
Mm-hmm.
Phil, what about you? Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I'd say, I mean, I think given where we're starting from, it's very, very hard to present a society like that, a matriarchal kind of society, because our entire history is kind of patriarchal from thousands of years back. So it makes it very difficult for us to position ourselves because there's so much history you have to consider. And it is, as Nick just said, like all those little details that have to go into it. So I come at it from a slightly different perspective, and I'd look for something a bit closer to what we've got. But I think one thing that can be done, which if I would generally always look to our own history, I find inspiration from real world stuff, and you can in certain situations just present it as natural. When you've got a woman in power, sometimes you have these moments where it happens and it is just natural, and sometimes people will just go with it. And you've got, if it's just you can still frame it in a patriarchal society. It can still have all these barriers around it, but sometimes you just get someone who's found themselves in this position, and oftentimes it's because they're just such a competent person, or they can go to other extremes. Could be someone very corrupt, could be so. But the point is that every now and again you can just put them in there, and if you treat it in a natural way, and if you get the character right, if it's someone who you feel like could take control of the situation, then very much you can just make it seem more natural. But you have to consider how that fits to the wider world as well. And I think, with my Blood Scout series is very much presented like that. I've deliberately put it in a very patriarchal society. It's very much based on our own, so it's not that much of a stretch. But I created a situation where you just have this platoon of female soldiers in the middle of this massive war, and they are very much an aberration. They're not supposed to be there. Every time they encounter people, they're like, why are there women soldiers here? But they're very good at what they do, and because it's the middle of a war, people roll with it because they're more interested in surviving than making a fuss about it. And that was stuff that I very much based on research. I didn't just, I looked to see, is this actually something that could have happened at any time in our history? And it very much did. And this is why I had my books for my props to show you. Most of what I got did come from a lot of the research of this absolutely fascinating book, The Unwomanly Face of War, which is all about the Russian female soldiers in the Second World War. And they very much they were just there, they were fighting. And it's all their own accounts talking about, the men weren't causing a fuss because they were just fighting side by side and they had to get on with the job. So sometimes you can fit it in that way.
I think it's very interesting how, obviously history is written, and historically women have been written out of it. But the fact is, women have always been there. They have always. And it's like, I was reading a book recently, and we were talking about women in war. A classic example of women in war is Cold Mountain. Now, it's not about the women in the actual front line. It's about what happens when the men all go away and the women are left behind. What do they do? Because there's no men working the land. There's none of that. So what do? They actually get on with it, and they do it, and they survive, and it's okay. And it's interesting how women are sort of written out. Obviously, when the men came back from the war, then suddenly women were like, oh yeah, you're not allowed to work anymore. It's like, well, hold on a minute. And that's where big cultural shifts happen, actually, quite naturally, is after big wars and big conflicts and everything. I was reading a book recently where very patriarchal society, but it was mentioned that in the father's generation, there was a big war, and a lot of the young men of that generation died. And yet, in the structure of the society it's written in, there is absolutely no reflection of that whatsoever. And the female characters are very much sidelined and everything. And the actual, I did find myself thinking, well, if that's happened, how are these people even alive? Because so far, they've got zero signs that they could even function, let alone actually survive in that kind of situation. And so I think that if you're writing just a general society, you're building a world, and there has been conflict, and if it's a very patriarchal world, you got to think, what were the women doing? Because they sure as hell were doing something. Like, they wouldn't have just been sitting there going, "Oh no, he won't come home." I mean, at some point you've got to eat breakfast, right? You got to actually sort yourself out. So what were they doing? How did it work? Yeah.
I think there's some really great points there. We've had a question from the chat, which I'm just going to pop up now. So if any of my lovely guests can jump on this. So as books with male MCs can easily show, not tell, male power dynamics, do you have any advice or suggestions for a female MC how to show political and magical power, as I want to show the power, not tell it? Great question.
I have so many views. No, go on.
Just a short point. It's just one easy thing I think you can do is just the way that people respond and listen to her. If she is being taken seriously, if her points and strategies are being acted on and listened to, I think that goes a long way to showing that this person has power and influence, because people are listening to her.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah, the classic example of that is the scene at Mad Max Fury Road, where Furiosa appears. We've not seen anything of her story up until that point, where she appears and everybody's like, "Oh my god, she is awesome," and you know, and there's just this hush and this respect and everything. And in an instant, you get she's badass. She knows what she's doing. You know, she's proven herself. I'm on board with this. No words are spoken. She sure as hell doesn't say anything. She doesn't say much. That's just her character. And yet it is there. And yeah, I love that setup.
Yeah. Anyone else got any other sort of pills of wisdom, Emily?
So one of my pet peeves on introducing female characters with a lot of power is when you've got this whole setup, guy walks into an area, she appears and they get into a fight, and that's how she proves that she is, you know, physically dominant and she can fight him and, you know, and pin him or whatever. And it's like, that is quite tedious. And not only is it a bit tedious, it also has the danger of making the female character come across as unhinged. Because if the first thing she does when a guy walks into a room is attack him, I mean, she may have good reason for that. See list of reasons to be enraged. But if that's the first thing she does, is it going to make your reader think, "Oh yeah, she seems like a reasonable person to have around"? Or is it going to make them go, "Okay, okay," and it's probably the latter. Okay, so, you know, show don't tell is all very well and good, but one of the ways you can show is by having her choose not to be violent, because she can, and if she did, she'd fuck them up. But she's choosing not to, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a similar kind of vibe, one of the things that I find I kind of advise people on the odd occasion that I get asked for advice, doesn't happen very often, is that people can almost get themselves into this state where they worry so much about making the woman character and not basically just a male character, but in a woman's body, that they will overplay you know, certain things that they, you know, that they consider to be womanly reactions. So, for example, showing softness or showing, you know, nurturing. So, let's say, for example, you know, a woman captain in the guard has just had someone executed, and then they'll walk into another room and they'll cry because they're a woman, and it's, you know, the intention is good. The intention is trying to show that they have this softer side and that they're trying to bring in these quote unquote feminine characteristics, but it's putting too much of it in. So think about the subtle ways that you can show his characteristics, and, you know, instead of having her go into another room and cry, have her look away for a moment and then look back, you know, and that is something that, you know, would feel realistic. It would still convey the same message that you want to convey, but without kind of overplaying that hand. So I'd say that's just something to be aware of. Great question. If anyone's got any other questions, pop them in the chat. But let's talk a little bit about emotions, because I don't know about you guys, but every time I have to make a big decision, I have a little cry about it first, you know, because all my emotions start rushing around my head. You know, it takes a while for them to clear out. So can we make women in power and authority emotional? Is that okay? Personally, I think it is. It's all about doing it the right way. I'm going to pick on Phil first for this one.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think they need to be emotional, or you don't really have a story, do you? Because I think that's the danger that a lot of people do with writing female characters, is they become flat. I mean, men writing female characters at least anyway, because they want to fit into a certain type of person, and normally it's a nice woman or a nasty woman, and it's just that's not how people work. And it's it's such a bizarre idea we have that women are emotional when you have men are ridiculous people themselves. That men are so insecure and insular, and the things we're getting from our political leaders around the world now are just non-stop emotion. But it's which emotions you go for, I guess, that make the character more compelling. As you say, you don't want to go for it's cliched if you start, oh, she's a woman, she's going to cry kind of thing. It's going for the other emotions. And I think going back to what Emily said, really thinking about what's motivating them. Why are they doing what they're doing? Because that's where you get to the real kind of emotional aspects coming through. I think some of the authors that I think do this really well tend to come from a lot of the Afro-American community ones I read. They do it great. Like you read N.K. Jemisin or Nnedi Okorafor, their books are full of emotion. But it's all sorts of different emotion. It's not one track, but they're full of emotion. They're packed with it. It's great.
I think. Oh, sorry.
Go
Sorry.
Who's giving way there? I don't know.
No, you go, Tim.
I'm just going to mine's quite quick. Like, just again, I suppose it comes back to that character consistency as well. There's nothing wrong with a character being emotional. There's nothing wrong with a character being closed off, or a psychopath. All of those are sort of interesting traits that don't necessarily attach to a particular gender. But I think sometimes when you're writing characters, it's very easy to overthink or fall into those stereotypes. It's much more important though to be clear about what is this character about. And I think a lot of that comes back to that point Rita said before, which is really important about their motivations and their goals. That will drive an awful lot of how a character behaves in a given scenario. So rather than saying, oh, they're a female character, therefore they must lose it completely in this very dramatic or difficult scene. I think if you ask those questions more about, okay, what does this mean for that character's goals and objectives? What does their reaction likely to mean as a result of that? You'll get a more credible and a more realistic and nuanced response out of your character, out of your writing. So I do think that whole point about rounded characters, goals, ambitions, and what they're there to do helps actually overcome some of these hurdles you can otherwise fall into. I think for me they're the kind of example a bit of it's a lazy writing where you haven't thought through all those things, you haven't fully fleshed out your character basically.
Yeah. Emily, have you got anything to add on that at all?
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, if you're writing a character in a situation where it's like a very patriarchal society or something like that, and you've got a woman in a position of power, frustration is probably a very key emotion that she's going to be feeling. Frustration can show itself in an awful lot of situations, but the need to react in a certain way, being fully conflicted about the fact that potentially performance is part of survival in that role, trying to also be true to herself and find moments to be true to herself, but also not always being aware of the fact she's potentially on show and feeling those pressures and also feeling resentful about that as well. With Isra, she is a messed up person. But one of the things that always hangs over her head is the fact that she has been built to be destructive. And if she is not destructive, she could be written off. And that is not a good thing where she comes from. And so therefore, a lot of what she does is just projecting this huge, sense of power in front of her. And this idea almost of herself. And then behind it, she's a mess. And it's only specific places that I get to show that in the narrative. The rest of the time, she is just seen as this force of nature. And knowing that is frustrating, knowing that a person can be projecting a thing, but a whole lot of things underneath, you've got to know, even if you're not in that character's head, you've got to know if the character over there is in that situation, if they are projecting, because then when it really, really gets tense, does that continue, or is there a crack in it? What causes the crack? Is there a weak foot? Is there a trigger? And where does that trigger come from? Like in their past, at some point, have they been in a situation where they failed to uphold this demeanor, and then something happened? In which case, if something like that happens again, is it going to have the same reaction, or is it going to have an opposing reaction, and actually she just gets worse and more combative? You know, reactions to that. I don't know if I'm making any sense at this point. I blame my flu brain, but yeah.
No, you're absolutely making sense to me. There's a couple of comments that have just been made in the chat that I'm going to jump on in a second. Fraser, our lovely Fraser Armitage, is in there chatting away to people. But he did mention that on our panel this morning with Sienna Frost, we did talk a little bit about this panel and women in power, and we were talking about kind of traditional feminine roles, particularly women in the home, and that's sort of something I want to dive into as sort of our last big talking point. Particularly writing traditional feminine roles, but without relying on traditional feminine traits. So we sort of touched on this already with the emotions. But, for example, a strong mother character might be depicted as protective, self-sacrificing, a sort of mama bear character. Very rarely are they lauded for their pragmatism or their ability to put together flat pack furniture. So how do we build those characters with traits that kind of move away from what are the traditional feminine? I'm going to pick on Tim for this one because I feel that of everyone here, you have the most traditionally patriarchal society with women in those feminine roles. Yet for me as a reader, I never felt that they were, reliant on simpering and that kind of,
Well, I'm really glad you said that. It'd be awful if it was the opposite, because it would have been like end of panel. Trying to think of, I suppose again, it's about the depth, isn't it? When I was thinking about this question earlier on, actually, in terms of I did think about Ed Crocker's Lightfall series. I don't know whether anyone's ever read that particular book, but it starts off from the perspective of a maid in a sort of like a Versailles Palace kind of like sort of setup, and she's just seems to totally unremarkable, but she's got a compelling voice right from the off. And I thought it was a really interesting place to start from, like, the people that aren't necessarily the ruling class, or aren't necessarily the people that are in charge. But it helps that she's a vampire, so that obviously does give her a bit of something slightly different from a typical maid. But what makes her fascinating is that she's got a role where she's got to sort of like operate within particular tram lines and particular societal expectations, but at the same time she's got this really self-destructive curiosity streak and cannot help but sort of poke her nose in where it's not wanted and get herself into trouble. And I think it's that, I suppose, I think it's that juxtaposition between her societal role is expected to be like, reserved, quiet, in the background, not particularly prominent, yet actually what she does in that role and what the nobility don't see as she's going around doing it make her a really compelling character. So sometimes that juxtaposition between the two things is what gives it perhaps a bit of a lift and gives it a bit of an edge.
Yeah. Nick, what's your take on this?
I think, like Tim says, that juxtaposition can be a really interesting thing to play with, and having a woman that's not necessarily just one thing, but also showing maybe like the more domestic side as well. So one of my absolute favorite characters in just literature is Avasarala from The Expanse. Now she is like in her 70s. She is like absolute ruthless, foul-mouthed politician who will cut her enemies down without a second thought. But she is also like a doting grandmother. And when you see the kind of family side, it's nice to have a character that you can see that, there can be both. One doesn't negate the other, and they're not mutually exclusive. She can be doing absolutely terrible deeds that border on war crimes, but also be kind of absolutely doting on her grandkids. And her husband like writes her poetry, and she loves the poetry and stuff. So, I don't think people, we all know people aren't just one thing. People have a personal life, a family life, as well as their job. So I think being able to show a character has those nuances and aren't just all one thing, go quite a long way to sort of showing that those roles are not set as one thing.
Yeah. Phil, when your women characters are busy kicking ass in the battlefield, are they assembling wardrobes?
I don't dwell on it that much in the stories. I think, and it's just, I mean, I think Nick's covered it very well. It's all about giving them depth, but I think that I guess the interesting question there is if you're including it in the story, then why? What does it? How does it make them interesting in relation to the plot? And a lot of the time that will be in their attitudes and why they're doing what they're doing. Yeah, my characters, I don't tend to do people at home in my books in general anyway. They're often off doing stuff. But one of the things I would suggest, though, as a kind of shortcut, I'm not a fan of shortcuts and tricks and stuff, but one of the things that strikes me is if you're writing a character and it feels two-dimensional and you've got someone and you're just putting them in that role, then would be to add in something that's contrary to what they're doing, something that'd actually be different. You know, if you've got a very caring mother, then give her a flaw. What's her problem? What's her issues? What's her frustrations, as Emily says? But you know, like, yeah, it's you.
She's hiding in the wardrobe eating chocolate so that her children won't see and ask for chocolate.
Yeah. Or like, you know, if you've got the mother will do anything for her kids except that one. You suddenly have a character, and it's not just a cookie cut character.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's look for something that comes out of the mold, basically, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, and you've actually reminded me, because I've recently been rewatching Downton Abbey in my very small amounts of downtime when I'm not doing spotlight stuff this weekend. And there's a great quote in it that there's more than one type of good mother. And I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind, that, you know, there are many variants of, you know, mother archetypes or warrior archetypes or nuns, you know, whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be pigeonholed into this very small and tiny box. And Emily, I just want to give you a chance to weigh in on this before we kind of move to the last point.
Yeah, so I was just going to actually say, because I've made loads of notes and I've referred to absolutely zero of them. So I'm going to do that now. So basically, I would say that women do what needs, a lot of women, let's say just all women, no, a lot of women do what needs to be done. And that sort of comes back to what are the women doing while the guys are fucked off to war? You know, because they're still putting food on the table. They're still doing the things. They're doing what needs to be done. And one of the things that's very interesting, a lot of studies have been done into different styles of leadership. Okay, and it's a very male sort of style of leadership to go for this. Command and control is what it's called. And that is sort of, I'm in charge. It's Trump, basically, wanker that he is. I'm in charge. You do what I say. I'm in control. I'm not listening to anybody. Science, schmience. I don't care. This is how it is, right? Female leadership tends to be what we call transformational leadership. Transformational leadership, when things are going swimmingly, often characterize itself as democratic leadership. And that means you listen to all of the people around you, you listen to the people who have the expertise and all of this, you make decisions based on what everyone's saying. But because it's transformational leadership, when the shit hits the fan, they step into a more positive role. Right, okay, you shut up, this person speak, right, we're doing that, you know, and it's much more directional and commanding. And this has been observed, studies have been done on women and men in positions of power. One of the things that I would always say is that a lot of people do the whole, I'm writing a male character and I'm putting a female name to it. The thing is that there's an awful lot of sort of, you know, like say, okay, I'm me. So let's talk about serial killers, right? This is a great example. Male serial killers, 83% of serial killers are male. They are normally driven by sexual impulse. They hunt. They're opportunists. They'll take out, you know, people on those bases. Female serial killers, 17% of serial killers, are resource driven. So basically, they will often take out husbands or boyfriends, and normally it will be through poison and for stuff, right? They want a house or something like that. Okay, now what I'm doing there is I'm saying, okay, you've got a male and you've got a female. They're not interchangeable. You put a woman in the same position as a man and she will go about it in completely different ways. And there are lots of studies out there to show how those things differ and how they manifest differently. So if you're doing that, just look it up. Look it up. Loads of people have done the research. It's not hard. Like, loads of people are nerdy about this shit. They will observe it all. Yeah, like, don't assume that if you've got a serial killer, it will always be the same reason.
Awesome. And I love that what Emily's done there is segued me nicely into my very last question, which is actually a question from the chat. PL Stewart's been with us tonight and has asked, do you have any examples of, characters that are what we're talking about tonight, good depictions of women in authority and power, either, a non-fiction, reference point for someone, or a work of fiction that you particularly enjoyed and think is a great example? Yes, Fraser, we can confirm the number one reason for murder is frustration over flat pack furniture. You are correct there.
The number of murder scenes with those little spanners that come from IKEA.
Alan Keyes.
It's amazing.
Yeah, that's the thing. That happens all the time. Just you heard it, yeah.
And not all of them slipped and fell, okay?
Death by Alan Key. Okay, let's do a little bit of a round robin. Let's go for who is our favourite woman in power character. So Tim, let's go with you first.
Oh gosh, it's a difficult one, isn't it? I picked Sam earlier because she wasn't in power. I think Lightfall springs straight into my mind in relation to, I think, and I've forgotten the name of. There's also the leader of the rebellion, who's like and I forgot, Kirsten. I'll have to figure this out later on. Who's sort of, she appears to be quite a vain, noble woman, and sort of like moves in higher society and all the rest of it. But again, she's actually pulling the strings behind the scenes and secretly
Are you talking
trying
about
to.
Mon Mothma?
No, I'm not sure. It's
okay.
No, it's in Lightfall rather than in anything else. Yeah, kind of. Just I suppose it's really because she's in power in the way you traditionally expect her to be in power, but she's also actually subverting the very power structures that actually give her her power and her status in society. And I thought it's just a really clever depiction of, I suppose, those two things coming to play. It'd be a really great point if I could actually think of her character's name, but sadly I can't.
So there you go, PL. Tim's choice is that person that was in that thing that he read.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really good. It was really good. Highly recommend it.
Phil, what about you?
It's a very difficult one because there's so many choices and so many different ideas of what constitutes power as well. It could be lots of different positions. I'd go probably in terms of characters and just the idea of a powerful woman. I guess I'd go back to Nick's example from earlier, the Gideon the Ninth, and Harrow as well. Both of them, I think, are just fantastic characters with power. And not in the traditional sense, they're not really, controlling in any way. They're just very self-assured in their own ways. But I've got all sorts of examples. The one that always springs to my mind, which is always a ridiculous example because it's sort of always out of context, and I think I brought this up on a panel once before that we might have been on together, Emily, is the character, I think it's Dorothea, if that's her name, from Middlemarch. She always comes to my mind because it's such a... I find that book absolutely fascinating because it's such a kind of non-event book. It's kind of, you don't feel like much is happening. It's just people having their provincial lives. But the main character in that, I think, is a fantastic example of a character who gets on and does what she needs to do and deals with all these frustrations. And it's just beautifully done. I think she's great.
Awesome. Nick?
Yeah, I think I mentioned mine earlier. Avasarala from The Expanse. She's probably just my favourite character non-stop. I think she's brilliant. And the fact that she's not perfect at all in a physical sense. She can't fight, she needs people to look after her in that sense. But in terms of like the political and the strategic and stuff, she's just like miles ahead. And actually I think all of the women in The Expanse are generally like really well written. You've got Bobby, who is that kind of soldier warrior archetype, but doesn't feel kind of stereotypical or stale or anything. You've got Naomi, who is just so sort of quiet but also smart, and really good at forging kind of personal relationships. So that whole series has got such a wealth of different kinds of female characters that are just very, very good.
Kamina drummer.
Yeah, drummer.
I can see Emily nodding away at that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Any
I've got a
list.
list.
I mean, please share.
Well, okay, Christian Abasarala and Drama, all of the Expanse characters are basically at the top of it. Also, Elizabeth Weir, who is the commander of Stargate Atlantis. She's an amazing character. She's a lead negotiator, goes in as a civilian commander of a military operation. Absolutely incredible adaptive leadership exhibited in the first episode of Atlantis there by her. Mare in Empire of Sand, Tasha Suri, she's a very interesting character. So definitely look her up. Thalia is amazing in Court of Broken Knives, Anna Smith Spark. She's a high priestess, and she leaves the order, but she continues to be incredibly powerful throughout the entire series. She's an amazing character. Game of Thrones, obviously, there's just tons of amazing ones. Cersei, Marjorie, Sansa, Daenerys. I've got Catelyn, Olenna Tyrell, all just really interesting examples. Mon Mothma, I did put in there. Representative in Andor. Got a memory called Empire, Arkady Martine, absolutely amazing book about politics, just the politics of an empire, a huge, bloated, intergalactic empire. And the female characters in that are absolutely amazing. I mean, the main character and the main supporting character are both women. One of the most scary characters in it is also a woman, but just quietly scary and just with a hell of a lot of authority. And yeah, she's amazing. Also, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. I don't think that one gets enough of a shout out, but there's a lot of very interesting.
Choice.
Oh man, like so good. And yeah, Cold Mountain, and that's sort of that's my lot.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Some great examples there. I am very aware of the time and that we need to start wrapping up now, but I am going to have to put up this comment from Fraser. The Overlords of Spotlight H.L. Prinsley is a great example of a woman in power, and yes, I am contractually obliged to say that, which kind of proves my point. I would like to make it very clear that Fraser is not under duress. He does this voluntarily.
Just contract.
And don't let him tell you otherwise.
Well, that's the story you're telling, Holly, isn't it? But that's not.
I've actually, I keep Fraser in a cupboard. He's released once a day to record podcasts, and that's it. We do need to wrap up. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and it's been a pleasure to speak to you all. I would like for you to all pitch your works, please. And also, I'm going to ask Tim if you could also do a little pitch for the Spotlight Indie Patreon, which launched this week as well.
Okay, please back the Spotlight Indie Patreon and become a paid supporter. So yeah, I suppose why do that? Because it's the thing that helps run, helps us fund events like this, but also helps us fund in-person events as well and keep them free for people to attend, which I think does set us apart from a lot of the other literary events and things that go on out there. So if you want to support Spotlight Indie, go and look us up on Patreon. If you look it up as Spotlight Indie with one word, you'll actually find it on the app. If you put a gap in those words, you won't. So put it in to remove that gap and you'll be absolutely fine. You want me to also plug my other stuff as well? Buy my stuff.
If you'd like to, you don't have
to. I'm a writer. I want people to read my stuff. Please do. If you want to find it, look for Tim Hardy author around things like the website, particularly my website. And I'm also on social media on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Facebook. So just type in those words at your platform of choice and track me down.
Awesome. Phil, where can people find you?
I'm on phil-williams.co.uk. That's got, I think, most of my books, if not all of them. It's hard to keep track, but I've got a lot of stuff out there, and that's the best place to start. Social media, I'm kind of coming and going with at the moment, but yeah, look on my website and buy all my books.
Buy all the books, buy everyone's books.
All of them.
Nick, what about you?
So you can find out all about my books on my website, which is just ncscrimger.com, and I'm also on social media. I'm just all the channels that I'm on. I'm at Scrimscribes, so wherever you put that in, you'll find me there.
Awesome. And Emily, what about you?
So you can find the blog that I've been talking about at emilyinkpen.com. Just go to the blog. That's all there for free. I am at Emily Inkpen everywhere. Because I'm in marketing and I like to make things easy for everybody. And so yeah, I'm all over the place there. And yeah, if you want to listen to Dex Legacy, just search the Dex Legacy in any podcast platform. And that's all there.
Amazing. Thank you so much to all of my guests for joining me. Thank you for everyone in the chat for all your questions and comments. As we have mentioned multiple times over this weekend. We are doing the big online weekend, but we are also doing our in-person event on the 23rd of May at the Flax Mill Maltings in Shrewsbury. It is free to attend. We've got panels going on all day. We've got author chats. We've got walk-up advice. We've got merch tables. We've got market. Everything going on that day. So if you can make it, please do. Please spread the word and help us beat the algorithm so we can let as many people know about it as possible. Tim has already kindly mentioned the Patreon. Next up in the big indie weekend, we have a channel jump. We're going over to the Four Beersmen of the Bookpocalypse for their live RPG with Anna Stevens and AC Cross. It may have, in fact, already started, so go run now to go and join it. And we will see you all again tomorrow for some more live panels, videos, chats, and all good, awesome indie stuff. But until then, take care and have a very good evening. Bye.
Thank you.